Well, welcome. Welcome to today's Georgia Tech Clean Energy Speaker Series on building your clean tech company in the South. I'm Ben Hill. I'm with Georgia Tech's Venture Lab program, and I'd like to welcome you to today's program. And it's great to have you participate in this ongoing discussion of the Georgia Tech Clean Energy Speaker Series about the role of clean energy and clean technology in meeting energy demand in the Southeast for the next 20 years. A number of organizations make this program series possible, and I'd like to recognize, and individuals as well, and I'd like to recognize and thank them for their continued support of this series. We have several great advisors who have really rolled up their sleeves and helped form and frame the discussions and brought resources to bear in terms of speakers and other things. And I'd like to recognize Marilyn Brown, Valerie Thomas, David Scholl, who are all faculty at Georgia Tech, Jay Hakes, who's the director of the Carter Libraries, and Ken Ostrowski, director of McKinsey & Company, and thank them for their support. I'd also like to thank the law firm Sutherland, Asbill & Brennan for providing the seed funding, which kicked off this series in November 2009. McKinsey & Company is also a big supporter, and have provided consultants and resources to this series. The Georgia Tech Strategic Energy Institute has provided financial support. South Base Institute, and of course the Brooke Byers Institute here at Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech's Enterprise Innovation Institute. So I'd like to, again, recognize and thank them for their participation and support. Today's presentation will be, once the program's complete, we'll go through a processing, and this will be archived and up on the web in about 24 to 48 hours. And you can find today's presentation as well as previous presentations on the website secleanenergy.gottech.edu. Microphones will be passed around during the Q&A session, and should there be spontaneous questions in between, before the Q&A session, just give us just a second so we can grab a microphone and get it to you. Because this session is being webcast, it's important that you speak into the microphone, speak your questions into the microphone so our webcast participants can hear and understand. And for those of you participating over the web, you can email your questions to me, and I will pass them on to our speakers. And my email address is ben.hill@georgiatech.edu. That's ben.hill@gatech.edu. As a friendly reminder, and I always try to make this announcement at every program, just because, as a friendly reminder, if you have comments rather than questions, I would just ask that you keep your comments kind of short and sweet, so we can get as many comments and questions addressed during the session as possible. Be sure to mark your calendar for the next program, which will be Wednesday, April the 18th. We're moving the series from the last Wednesday of the month in April to Earth Week celebration here at Georgia Tech. So the next program will be the third Wednesday of the month. Well, it'll be April the 18th. And where the topic will be building consensus on the role of clean energy. And we have two exceptional speakers participating in this discussion. One is Reed Decton, who, just a little background, he's currently the executive director of the Energy Future Coalition in Washington. But before holding that role, he was Assistant Deputy Secretary of Energy, was a speechwriter in the H.W. Bush White House, and has held other positions in think tanks and other organizations in the Washington area. And then Jay Hakes, who is the director of the Carter Library, who's also the former administrator of the EIA, and who's the author of the book, A Declaration of Energy Independence, will be a speaker in that presentation and discussion as well. So remember, Wednesday, April 18th. So I'd like to introduce, let me just ask, is Mike Vonich from Sutherland here? Okay. Well, let me introduce our speakers. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce our three speakers today, and very much look forward to their insights and comments about building a clean energy, clean tech company in the South. Our first speaker will be PaulQuinn, who is Managing Director of the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. Paul handles day-to-day operations of the organization and directs research, outreach, and fundraising activities. He has served and serves on numerous advisory groups in North Carolina, including the Wind Technical Advisory Committee, the Energy Efficiency Working Group, the Western North Carolina Clean Energy Economy Leadership Account Group, and the Steering Committee for the State Energy Sector Partnership. He's testified at the North Carolina Utilities Commission and has consulted for U.S. DOE. Paul co-authors the annual North Carolina Energy Data Book, which is a free download, and the annual North Carolina Renewable Energy Efficiency and Industry Census, which is also a free download. Good reference material. He's a regular instructor at programs offered by NC State. He has a BS from the University of Notre Dame and a Master in Public Policy and a Master of Environmental Management from Duke University. And Duke is spelled D-U-K-E, not D-O-O-K. So next I'd like to introduce Player Pate, who's Director of Marketing at DualX. Player serves as Director of Marketing, where he oversees go-to-market strategies, sales pipeline management, and program execution across global markets. DualX is a leading innovator in sustainable energy management for the enterprise. The company, as we'll find out, is headquartered here in Atlanta with offices in Shanghai, Tokyo, Paris, Munich, and Kassel, Germany, and in other locations around the U.S. Prior to joining DualX, Player was a Director of Business Development at IBM, where he led partner strategy for IBM's Security Services division. He's also held various marketing positions at both IBM and Internet Security Systems, which was acquired by IBM a few years back for a nice tidy sum of $1.5 billion, which was a good day, I suppose. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy and marketing from the College of Charleston. And our third speaker will be Anthony Coker, who's the Senior Director of Market and Solutions Development for Suniva. Anthony's responsible for solutions development, key customer relationships, and global product certification. I think Anthony is also employee number 12 at Suniva, and we'll get an update as to where Suniva's. He was part of the Dirty Dozen. Okay. Suniva, as some of us know, is an American manufacturer of high-efficiency crystalline silicon PV cells and high-power solar modules. The company evolved from work here at Georgia Tech with Professor Ajit Rohatgi of the school's University Center of Excellence in Photovoltaics. Suniva is the highest cell efficiency producer in the U.S., with production cell efficiencies exceeding 19% and R&D cell efficiencies exceeding 20%. Anthony is also a board member of the Technology Association of Georgia's Smart Grid Society and is chair of the Georgia Solar Energy Association. Anthony's held numerous management, sales, and marketing positions with GE Plastics, Dow Corning, Hemlock Semiconductor, Accenture, and others. He has a Bachelor of Chemical Engineering from Georgia Tech and has pursued an executive MBA at Southern Methodist. So at this point, I'd like to turn the program over to Paul, and then we'll kick off the discussions and presentations.
Thank you, Ben. Pleasure to be here today. I want to thank Ben for the invitation and for Georgia Tech putting together this series. I am PaulQuinn with the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. Just to orient folks to my organization, we're a membership-based nonprofit. We work statewide, but our headquarters is in Raleigh, North Carolina, and our mission is promote renewable energy and energy efficiency, and we do that through three ways: public policy, education, and economic development. And I mention this because you can see the agenda here, and much of my comments initially will focus in on the electricity markets. Most of our work at my organization that we focus in on is more in the electric sector. So clean energy is a very, very big, broad spectrum, but most of my comments will focus in on the electric sector, which is still very, very large and broad. Once noting some of the differences of how we see the Southeast being different from the rest of the United States, I'll touch on some of the international trends that are happening in clean energy. We've got some other speakers that can talk about selling into those markets at much greater depth than myself. And then for today's topic, looking at some of the business development implications for what we're seeing in trends both within the Southeast, within the U.S., and internationally as well. So to go ahead and jump right in and start looking at the Southeast, this is the starting point of this conversation, and that is that the Southeast has regulated markets. And what that means is we have typically large investor-owned utilities. They have shareholders that they have to answer to, and their rates are regulated by typically utilities commission in each state. If you go to the Northeast or some of these other large energy markets like Texas or California, you have a very different dynamic. Early last decade, many of those markets were deregulated. Customers have choice of who their utility is, who delivers them electricity or power. But down here in the Southeast, that's typically not the case. And in North Carolina, I've even asked for maps to figure out where one utility begins and ends, and I have yet to been able to find a clear delineation or kind of record of where one utility starts and one ends. Each utility knows exactly where that line is, but I have yet to find that compiled somewhere in one place. One of the important factors in that is that it is the investor-owned utilities that are typically regulated by the commission. And you can see from this slide here that they typically have a very large retail base and a large number of retail sales throughout each of the states in the Southeast. What is also important, and particularly true in North Carolina, is they're generally the entities that own much of the generation assets. So for example, in North Carolina, they're one of the primary sellers of wholesale electricity in the state. So they have the consequence of this is they're a very critical and important stakeholder when you're starting to talk about electricity markets, both in North Carolina and the Southeast. And these are institutions and companies that are driven kind of by three major points. One is safety, reliability, and affordability of their products. And that comes back to the fact that they're regulated. Those are very strong tenets that they're measured by and things that they are forever working towards. What that means if you're building a company in the Southeast and you intend to have it be involved in the electricity sector is that you will need to have a product that helps them achieve one of those three goals, or at a very minimum, does not prevent them or hinder them from achieving safety, reliability, and affordability. If you are pursuing opportunities that are going to change one of those dynamics, you're probably going to have a difficult challenge integrating them as a partner in your business model. So that's a point to note. When you flip over to thinking about what does the transmission infrastructure look like in the Southeast, this is also another place where the Southeast is very different from other parts of the state. You'll see these various colored pieces on this map here. They're called RTOs or ISOs. RTOs are regional transmission operators. ISOs are independent system operators. And in essence, what has happened in other parts of the country is that a third party, typically a nonprofit entity, has taken over the management and control of the grid. And that has been done in many instances to allow various generators to come on and create an even playing field in terms of access to the transmission grid. With the exception of a little sliver in North Carolina where the PJM territory dips down, we don't have that in the Southeast. What we have is typically the investor-owned utilities. Duke and Progress are two very big ones in the Southeast. And they're vertically integrated, which means they typically own and operate that transmission territory and manage that themselves. We don't have that third-party independent transmission overseer that you find elsewhere in the country. So again, if you're building a company that's going to be in the electricity space, and somehow if it's a generation company, and you anticipate interconnecting to the transmission grid, the investor-owned utilities are going to be a very important stakeholder and partner in that process. If you're thinking about a firm or company and anticipate that customers, end-use customers, are going to be your primary customer class, this is some older data. It's from 2008, but what it does is it shows that, in general, these are average prices by utility within the U.S. In general, for the Southeast, electric rates paid by customers are typically lower than what you see most other places, with the exception of the Midwest. But the higher populated areas in the United States, they typically have much, much higher electric rates. North Carolina is a bit of an anomaly there for the Southeast. Much of the geographic area is served by cooperatives, and we see rates much, much higher for cooperatives in North Carolina, and in many cases they're on par with what we see up in the Northeast. But the majority of customers, about 75% of the customers in North Carolina, are served by investor-owned utilities. So the lighter areas is where the population is concentrated within the state. Finally, looking at some of the policy drivers in the state, there's maybe a couple of things to note about the Southeast. The first is, in general, the region lacks a key policy driver that we've seen elsewhere in the country, and that's a renewable energy portfolio standard. North Carolina is the one exception. Let me back up 1 second. The states in green there have goals. The states in dark green, they have mandatory requirements. So there's about 29 states now that have mandatory portfolio standard requirements within the U.S. North Carolina is the one exception to that Southeast with a mandatory requirement. Without going into the gory details, it's a 12.5% requirement for our investor-owned utilities by the year 2021, and a 10% requirement for the municipal and cooperative utilities by the year 2018. It has been a very effective policy in spurring a renewable energy industry within the state of North Carolina. We have solar systems going in, biomass going in. We've got wind companies prospecting in the northeast part of the state. It has been very effective in creating the start of an industry within the state of North Carolina. We don't see that elsewhere. We don't see that driver elsewhere in the Southeast, so that is a bit of a challenge for companies in this space that are looking to find niches and move forward. The other important thing that this graph shows is that climate change typically in the Southeast is not a policy driver. There might be studies, there might be commissions, there might be activity to look at the impact, but at the end of the day, what we don't typically see is policy being enacted off of climate change. This has been a different case other places in the country. The black markings on this map show different carbon trading schemes, regional carbon trading schemes that have been enacted in the United States. But we don't see that type of activity in the Southeast. What I do see at times is folks from other parts of the country coming down to the Southeast and talking about climate change as a driver for clean energy, and especially if they're talking to decision makers, at least in North Carolina, that usually does not go over very well, and they're quickly dismissed. So that's one difference than what we see elsewhere in other parts of the country. If you take a closer look at energy efficiency, this is an annual report done by ACEEE, and it's an energy efficiency scorecard for each state across the United States, and they update it annually. And what this shows is that the Southeast, again, is a region that is either in the mid of the pack, depending on which states you're looking at, or towards the back of the pack. The darker purple is the states that have enacted more policies and have more programs that target energy efficiency in their state. And as you get lighter, there's less and less energy efficiency work being done. This is both an opportunity and a challenge. It's an opportunity because, in general, the Southeast has a tremendous amount of energy efficiency that could be pursued. The challenge in this space is that if it was easy, someone would already be doing it. So if you're going to go down that road, you might find folks not understanding the opportunity that you may have, or just folks not interested in even listening to the opportunities. One thing that the Southeast does have in common with the rest of the country is that the budgets are not looking state budgets are not looking very good. Much of the Southeast, southern states I have listed here, they had shortfalls in their fiscal year 2012 budgets, and a number of the states are already projecting shortfalls for 2013. So my organization gets phone calls sometimes from folks that are looking for funding or state programs. We don't hear in North Carolina any new kind of funding mechanisms being discussed, and even existing funding mechanisms for clean energy type programs are every once in a while considered as potential new revenue streams if they were eliminated for the state of North Carolina. And this trend is probably not going to change anytime in the near future. One other thing we are seeing in the Southeast, though, is this policy conversation is starting to spread throughout the state. The map here on the left shows that there was some conversations happening in 2007. That was the year North Carolina passed their portfolio standard. And if you fast forward to 2012 and 2013, there's a much wider degree of conversations happening, policy conversations happening in the Southeast at this point. I know there's a tax credit being discussed in South Carolina. Georgia considered third-party sales bill just recently. So there is portfolio standards in other states have come up at times. Whether they've gotten real serious consideration is another issue, but they are being discussed. But what's the most noteworthy thing about the Southeast is who the peer group is. Any of the states in the Southeast, if you typically go talk to decision makers and talk about the great energy success California has, that's probably not a great strategy for getting clean energy policy enacted in the Southeast. We find in North Carolina, even talking about the Northeast, that's not a great place to be talking about either because it's a bunch of Yankees. So typically what we see, though, is that the Southeast has a peer group of the Southeast. We see decision makers that are interested in what other states doing in the Southeast, what are the policies being enacted, and then a lot of modeling of policies and discussion around what are the best practices in the Southeast. So it's kind of a pool of states that look towards each other and follow each other in this policy conversation. We are starting to see that ripple out slowly over time. And the final thing I would note, this is data from North Carolina. This was a survey done in April of 2012. We're about to repeat this survey this year. One of the most unique features of what came out of this data set and these questions that we answered is that by and large, clean energy is a positive issue and has bipartisan support. Where energy becomes a contentious issue is when you start looking at coal and nuclear. Even natural gas numbers, which I don't have up here, about a 76% support rate. But it really is the coal and nuclear discussions that set people apart, divide across party lines, and divide across a number of different types. But when you start talking about wind or solar or a number of other clean energy technologies, you see overwhelming support. And when you start cutting it up different ways, you see it existing positive in all the different groupings. So before jumping on to some of the international trends, I'll just reiterate three key takeaways from the Southeast. The first is that the policy and regulatory environment makes it distinctly very different from other places in the country where you have large markets, very different from the Northeast, very different from Texas, very different from California, even Colorado. The second is that the low electricity prices in the Southeast typically are a challenge. If you're looking to do generation projects in the Southeast, you're going to have trouble or a challenge at least to make financing work on these projects. We see portfolio standards or other policies being required to make these projects work typically. And the third is that despite the public support and kind of the regional energy conversations that are happening, there's very little in the room of state budgets to support clean energy development at this time. So looking to the state government for funding of a lot of funding in this space is probably not going to happen anytime in the near future. Looking more globally on some of the trends that we're seeing, much of these numbers that I'll show are from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which is an excellent source for resources on these figures. And this is their total investment in clean energy over the last couple years. And you can see despite the global downturn and headwinds that we've had, there is still a growth in investment in clean energy globally. The rate of growth has slowed dramatically with the recession, but we're still seeing an increase year over year as we continue forward. When you start looking where this investment is happening globally, some of the terms here, the dark green says EMEA, and that's Europe, Middle East, and Africa. The middle tier there, those are the Americas, and the top tier, that's Asia and Oceanic. And just eyeballing, it's about a third for each category. So we are seeing this investment globally happening in a lot of different markets. There are some larger key markets in each one of those regions, but from a global standpoint, it is dispersed in different regions. Policy is a distinctly key and important aspect of where that investment is going. You can see that there are a number of some of those larger markets, the European markets and U.S. markets. Most recently, Bloomberg New Energy Finance Executive Director has been noting some states where policy is weakening. The U.S. is one of them. Europe's another one where feed-in tariffs has been a very large policy support and has been pulled back recently in some European countries. But there's a lot of other countries that are either improving their policies or putting in even stronger policies at this point in time. China is expected to be a very large market. And then the number of developing countries on this list is beginning to grow. There's a real opportunity in emerging markets for leapfrogging of technology, just as we've seen with telecom, a giant infrastructure to put in landlines. Some countries have just moved to mobile phones, and they've skipped over the landline. Electricity or energy might be a different dynamic, but there's still leapfrogging opportunities for countries to advance quickly without maybe building the same infrastructure that we see elsewhere in the world. This is another way of projecting forward and looking forward of how much money would be invested across the globe. You can see there are some of those key markets that still exist, and they're going to exist going forward, most likely Europe, US and Canada, China. But that rest of the world, that top purple bar, becomes a very significant piece of the investment as you move to 2030. If you look at generation resources and where some of this investment would go across generation technologies, wind and solar take up the largest piece of this projection here. You can see a sliver of offshore wind growing, but nowhere near the other two, solar and onshore wind, listed here. And then a number of other technologies at the very top there taking up the space as time goes forward for global investment. If you look at smart grid as a potential proxy for energy efficiency, what this graph here shows is both the need and progress made to date. And there's tremendous need. And if folks aren't familiar with the term smart grid, to put in a very simplistic term, basically it's taking information technology resources and laying that on top of the electric grid that we have in a very basic non-engineering terminology. If you think about the US and the giant infrastructure we've built with the electric grid, there's tremendous opportunity to improve that over time, add all sorts of new technologies. And if you flip and think of a developing country like India, just the opportunities to implement some of this technology from the beginning. There's a lot of potential investment opportunity, a lot of business models that could be developed both regionally in the US and internationally around this space. And there's a lot of companies looking to do that today. So to kind of wrap this up, in terms of if folks are thinking about developing companies or have products they're thinking of, what does it all mean? And I would boil it down to three kind of key takeaways. The first one is know your customer. The number of calls that I'll sometimes get of people with business models, sometimes they don't know who they will try to be selling their products or services to. If you're looking at end-use customers, a residential customer is going to be very different from a commercial customer, who's going to be very different from an industrial customer. If you've got products or services, knowing who you're tailoring them to and developing your message that way is going to be critical. What we typically see, though, if end-use customers are the target market, they're going to have capital cost challenges. And if you start talking about smart grid, we've been seeing some pushback in the U.S. about privacy concerns. There's, especially in California, issues of who knows what about folks' electricity use and what control they have over their energy use in their home. If electric utilities are the primary target of your product or service or company, a really critical, important aspect to them is they have very long investment cycles. A good example here is that in North Carolina, both Duke and Progress received smart grid funding through ARA, and both of them spent that, even though both are headquartered in North Carolina. Progress spent it in Florida, and Duke spent it much of it up in Ohio. A big reason for Progress was because they had just replaced all their meters, or many of their meters, in North Carolina, and they wanted to depreciate that asset before making an investment in new technology. So they work on very, very long timing and planning time horizons. If you've got a product or service and you're hoping to integrate that with the utility, you're going to need to be cognizant of how they plan and operate. And then also, if you're looking at between investor-owned utilities and cooperative municipal utilities, they have slightly different business motivations. One being a publicly traded company and having shareholders to relate to, and the munis and co-ops typically being member-based, and that's who also double as customers for their service and products. So they have slightly different motivations in that respect and can be interested in different products and services for that reason. The second really important thing I would note is know the policy landscape. As noted right from the beginning, regulated or unregulated markets are very different dynamics and create very different opportunities or niches for businesses. Knowing what the clean energy incentives are in whatever markets you're going to be pursuing. A great resource for this is the database for state incentives for renewable and efficiency. And that is the Desire database. It's the shorthand, and you can see the hyperlink there. And then the third is grants and funds. While there is some opportunities out there for these to be pursued, they're few and far between. I've gotten phone calls. If you've got a commercially viable technology, that's where the least money is. So if you've made a tweak to a wind turbine, there's probably not any funding to put that up somewhere. But that is not meant to be a discouragement from looking, but I would set hopes at the appropriate level. And finally, build a dynamic business plan. And there's a couple of bullets here about what I would mean. One would be to maximize the current incentives that are out there, certainly understand what they are. But the caveat here is don't build a long-term plan on their continued existence. The state tax or federal tax credits are set to expire at the end of 2016 for generation technologies. It's uncertain whether they would be extended. Wind credits are actually expiring sooner than that. There's been a policy called 1603 federal grants, so that's actually already expired. So if you're going to develop a business model, definitely use whatever incentives are in place, but also have a long-term plan to make your business or company competitive without them over the long term. Also in this space, anticipate strong competition from new technologies. If you think about the internet and the evolution of companies that were popular and then disappeared, I wouldn't be surprised if a similar trend happened in the clean energy space over time. So definitely be anticipating intense competition in this space and new technologies as you go forward. And finally, develop a strong network. And by that, it doesn't mean just your suppliers and your customers, but also look at government support services that exist. We've had some solar companies in North Carolina that are very successful working with workforce development boards and get assistance with training. If you're doing projects locally, definitely networking and getting to know elected officials and making them a partner in your projects, or even advocate organizations like the group that I work for, the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. They can be of assistance to know what's going on in some of these other areas and help companies as they grow. So with that, I will defer to Ben on questions now or at the end. Perfect. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul. Wait.
Thanks a lot, guys. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the experience of DualX. We're an Atlanta-based energy efficiency company, software company that's about 2 years old, and we'll talk a little bit about building an energy efficiency company here in the Southeast and talk a little bit about the challenges, how it relates to international markets, local markets, etc. So DualX is an enterprise energy management system. So it's a software program that helps companies quickly identify energy waste within their organizations. It runs across the IT network and monitors, analyzes, and controls the energy consumption of any device that's IP connected. So it leverages standard network protocols, helps reduce energy usage, energy costs, carbon emissions, and it's agentless, leverages the network, so it means no having to deploy additional software agents across the infrastructure. So, what we found is there really is a global challenge, right? So the energy supply cannot keep up with the demand. What we're finding right now is markets like the United States, where IT is a very heavy draw on power to fuel more than 8 billion IP connected devices, to support all of our computers, all of our smartphones, support our social networking lifestyles that we've adopted. And then looking internationally, you look at growing markets like China, like India, and they're, and energy is really fueling. These guys are just now starting to come online. If you look at the average number of IT devices that we have here in the world, these are just now becoming available in some of these markets. So you look at the demands that are coming across these new parts of the world, and it's just simple. The demand cannot, or the supply cannot keep up with the demand. It's an interesting study from McKinsey and Company in 2009 that took a look at the energy economy. And just to put it in perspective, you look at the internet economy, about $1 trillion globally, about 1.2 billion internet users, and we've had rapid innovation in the last 15 years. And then by contrast, you look at that to the energy economy, and it's 7 trillion. Yep. $7 trillion industry, about 4 billion people globally connected to the grid, but really little to no innovation. Now you look at the grid technology, since it was put into place, really, very little innovation that's gone onto place. And what we're finding is that smart grid investments really help the utilities, but what we're finding is corporations have very little control, very little visibility into their energy consumption beyond the plug load. So once the grid hits their buildings, it's just like you and me who have our utility bills at home. We get them, we open them up, we see the cost, we just pay it blindly, but it's really an unmanaged expense. You don't necessarily have the detail into what are the major consumers of electricity. What's making up this bill? If you could look in a corporation and see the data centers and the data centers by locations, particularly when you're talking about international companies and that are spread out and have many assets across their infrastructure, not necessarily sure where their energy hogs are. They just, like you and me, blindly pay the bills. So the McKinsey study was really interesting, and it said in the United States, this is the opportunity for about 23% reduction of projected demand, and that could really mean $1.2 trillion just in the United States alone of opportunity. Adds up to about 1.2 gigatons of carbon emissions. And it's billions and billions of devices. We're finding that there's 3 million data centers in the United States alone that many of them are dealing with the issue of energy capacity. And it's the fact that they've done a lot of innovations in terms of virtualization to reduce space, but they're finding that there's not enough power on the grid available to them to keep up with the computing demands of organizations, and they're really just strapped. So they're either looking at weighing the benefits of building a new data center, if that's possible, which can be upwards of $15 million, in capital expense, or looking at how they can identify waste. How can they reduce the energy consumption in their existing infrastructure? And that's what we're helping them do. So just a little bit of background on DualX. We were founded in 2009. The company came from a smart grid security project in Germany, where two of our founders were working on this security project, and in doing so, they were working with a major corporation who was providing them with terabytes of data on usage statistics, and they were looking at a couple of buildings, one that was occupied and one that was unoccupied. And what they found was that during the unoccupied building, during nights and weekends, and comparing it to the occupied building, there was very little difference in the amount of energy that was being consumed. So like smart German engineers, they decided to dig in and really try to get to the heart of the matter. And what they found is that the unoccupied building was just loaded with IT equipment that was always on. And it's just like many of us at home, we have all of our devices, we have our computers, we have our phones, and we expect an always connected experience, an always on experience. And all of these devices are consuming near peak loads on a 24-hour basis. It's always on, it's always available, whether we need it or not. But an analogy I like to think of it is, it's as if we were driving our cars home, park them in the garage, and we just get out, leave them running, go inside, sleep, come back the next morning. Okay, it's always on. We didn't really need it. Why didn't we cut it off? Well, in IT environments, you don't necessarily always want to cut off computers, particularly critical servers and things like that. There's no reason why we can't reduce the amount of energy that they're consuming, and there are technologies available to help us do that. So the technology was born out of that experiment and research project in Germany. In 2010, and it was done by a couple of engineers who had previously worked at a company called Cobion out of Kassel, Germany. That company was acquired by Internet Security Systems in 2004, a company that was headquartered here in Atlanta before it was sold to IBM in 2006. So with the idea of this new technology, the founders of Cobion and founders of DualX called upon Tom Noonan, who at the time was former CEO and president of Internet Security Systems, and at the time a partner in Tech Operators venture capital fund here in Atlanta, and approached him with the idea and just wanted some advice on one, raising capital in the United States to fund the technology, and then also just to have a look at the technology and get his thoughts on it. So after about 6 months of due diligence on the technology and testing it through a number of customers, including BMW and Deutsche Telekom and a number of high-profile customers in Germany, Tom came back and said, yeah, I tell you what, not only will we invest in it, if you want somebody to run the company, I'll come out of retirement. So that's kind of how we were founded in Germany and headquartered here in the United States. So we've got research and development offices in Kassel, Germany. It's a university town in northern Germany, about 2 hours from Frankfurt. So that's where most of our development is done. We set up headquarters in Atlanta and since started growing the company. In 2010, did an angel round of funding from Tech Operators here in Atlanta, and then a venture fund in Munich called Target Partners that set up about 1.7 million just to launch the company and feel out the market. And then started growing the company pretty rapidly, and really didn't expand into other markets until just last year. Just last year, we found that there was a good bit of demand. It was primarily coming out of Europe, where they even have a lot of carbon tax laws on the amount of carbon emissions that are being generated from corporations. The UK is real heavy in that right now. But what we're finding is that the European market has just been a lot more mature in terms of sustainability. They're just more sustainable minded. It also doesn't hurt that they're paying anywhere between 2 and 3 times the amount of energy per kilowatt hour price that we are here in the States. But they typically are just more sustainability minded. So what we're finding is, interestingly, in the IT space, this might be one of the first markets that is not led by the United States. And we're certainly finding that to be true in Europe. So we set up offices throughout Germany, in Paris, and then an event, tragic event happened with the tsunami in Japan. And so we reached out to the guy who used to run ISS for Japan, was the president of ISS KK, just to reach out to see if there was anything that could be done. We knew that they were operating data centers for 3 hours during the day, and then the grids would cut them off. There was no more electricity to be had, so they were running on diesel fuel generators that were costing about $9 per gallon of diesel, 100,000 gallons per day. It was extremely expensive, costing upwards of $1 million in a lot of cases, just to keep their businesses up and going. So we reached out to them and started, giving in kind a lot of product, and then found it just made sense to open up an office in Japan, which is about a year earlier than we had expected to, and that since has bled over into growing demand in China with regards to all of the innovation and demand that's going on over there. So right now we've got about 150 paying customers in 13 countries on 5 continents. So it's been really rapid growth. As I mentioned, we're privately held. In 2011, to fund the growth, we sought additional funding, really. The 1.7 was really angel funding. So we were really pleased to find, and we launched that, I guess, kicked it off in January, February timeframe, and we had a lot of interest. So, the good news for starting green tech companies is there is a lot of money out there. There's a lot of local money out there. There's a lot of national money out there, a lot of international money out there. So We were really pleased. We had more than 50 firms approach us of wanting to get into the deal, um, including a lot of local guys. And we're really pleased to see there really is a strong supportive community here in the Southeast for clean tech. We ultimately um, you know, pick these five, two who had originally invested, wanted to continue to invest, and it was basically just based on prior experience of management team, comfort level in working with the management team of these investors from previous companies. Our technology is patent pending on, we've got 3 patents and 2 more that are pending right now. Our DualX Energy Manager is our flagship product. And we've been fortunate enough to be garnished with some nice awards and recognition on a global basis. But what does it really take to build a good, strong clean tech company? And I think with any technology company, it starts with great technology, right? So the idea here was, let's not make companies incur additional investment. Let's help them leverage the existing infrastructure they have by leveraging the IP, connected, the network, utilize standard protocols that they're already investing in, whether it's SNMP or WinRM, different protocols that they're already using, instrument that with energy. It's essentially the idea of, you've heard a lot about big data right now, and that's what we're doing. We're just looking at the energy data that's being transmitted from the different devices that we have on our networks, and just apply some new intelligence to it. And then with that, you can apply controls and look at how you can reduce your energy costs, how you can reduce energy consumption. A lot of times it's just turning on and off computers, monitors, voice over IP phones, wireless access points, setting building control systems, lighting, HVAC on nights and weekends and holidays. You wouldn't believe how many people just leave all of this on 24/7, 365. Well, you start there, and then you can get more granular. There are a lot of advanced technologies. Intel processors now allow you to reduce the power state of the computers that they're running at different periods of time. So it's similar to putting a laptop in hibernate mode. You can certainly do that with reducing the power states of servers as well, so that when there's not the demand required, utilization required on that computer, why not power it down and reduce your energy consumption? So that's really the idea here. It's all network connected devices and systems throughout the distributed office, data centers, and facility systems as well. The other thing too is a proven management team, and that's really where it's certainly a big part of it. So all of our founders have extensive management experience in other sectors. What we're finding is that with what we're doing in energy and what we were doing in security is really not all that different. It's just that rather than looking for security vulnerabilities, we're querying energy usage rather than looking at looking for hackers and trying to keep bad guys out. We're trying to reduce energy waste. It's really not that dissimilar. But certainly having a proven management team, someone who's experienced in running multinational companies, someone who's used to running development on a very large scale has certainly helped. And we feel like we've got a strong management team. And the other thing too is and there've been there are a lot of great resources here in Atlanta and throughout the Southeast that that we're finding organizations like TAG, and then other organizations, or just having resources here locally. Law firms have been very helpful too. DLA Piper, Morris, Manning, Martin. A lot of them who have got extensive experience and interest in working with green tech companies and helping early stage companies get up and going, are certainly very helpful, and it's great to have the resources. The other thing too is just in working with Georgia Tech, working with Emory, there's been a lot of support on the academic side, on the research side. We've got a collaborative project with Georgia Tech going on right now where they're looking at analytics on building management systems, and we're sharing information as it relates to that. So we've got a real strong relationship with Georgia Tech there. And similarly, we have one in Castle too, with Castle University, and so being able to draw on those kinds of resources are extremely helpful and valuable. And then the other thing I'll say too, particularly in working as your company grows and you establish an international presence, a strong culture is very, very important. This was a theme that was taken after our first company kickoff, where we brought in 20-something guys from Germany, from Paris, from Tokyo, from China, and the U.S., and we took them up to the mountains in Georgia, and we decided, you know what, we're gonna set up, start establishing some culture. We talked with one another every day over Skype, conference calls, but we really felt that in order to make the company one that where people are excited to get up every morning and come work for it, you've got to believe in the technology, but you've got to trust one another, and that's where things that were really critical. So we went up to the Georgia mountains, camped out for a week. This barn is actually where we held meetings every single day. It was funny, there were chickens and goats running around, and it was really the strangest experience for a lot of our developers out of Germany who had, one, never stepped on an airplane before, much less come to the United States, and found a strange experience. But there's really no substitute for establishing a strong culture in any size organization. We find we're constantly challenging ourselves to making sure that work is not just a job. It's something you get up and you're passionate about. You've got to trust the people you work with, and that's the other thing too. And it goes back to our management team too. Typically there's a few degrees of separation, if more than one or two, between all of our executive management team and a lot of the people who work in our company. And so just working with people that you trust. So that's about it here for DualX, and we'll turn it over to Anthony. Thank you.
Is it right here?
Thanks for the opportunity to present today. I really tried to. Thanks. Really tried to change the pitch a little bit. I've been up here before, and I talked about Suneva's business and what we're doing globally and our international products. Today, I really wanted to try and make it a bit more of a focus on what I was saying earlier, is the Dirty Dozen. It was kind of starting off with the founding team at Suneva. We started downstairs here. Actually, it was upstairs. In the ATDC, in the development labs here, we had rented office space in the incubator. And from there, we've grown a business now that's up to 170 megawatts of cells in Norcross, and customers all around the globe. I'll walk you through a little bit of that, but mostly I was going to show you a couple pictures, talk about the development of the company, and then leave it open for questions and answers. So if you wanted to just say, focus in on the topic at hand, we can talk about policy, politics, we can talk about international markets and technology, but to be fair to Ben, if we focus on why a clean tech company in the Southeast, really for Suneva, it all started with the innovation. It's about IP. And what's interesting too, compared to DualX, which is about innovation and patented technology, we're technology based, but as a manufacturer, Suneva has a little bit more of a complexity because we have a supply chain that's not virtual. We've got to move a lot of product in and move a lot of product out of a factory. And we've got to service customers around the globe. That is mine. But but there were 3 pictures on here. I just thought, if it's a pain, you don't have to do it. I just thought it'd be fun. So it looks like the fun is wearing off of that. Yeah. So I just wanted to put in honor of Paul being down here from the great state of North Carolina, the Tar Heel State. He's a Dookie, though, so that's. I noticed you pointed that out. You had to, but I honor you. The other half of my house is a Dookie, so we watch a lot of basketball. But this was our first installation ever in the United States with Suniva modules. It's gotten great play. It's in North Carolina. It's outside of Asheville. It was done by FLS Energy up there. And it's a capped landfill, so it's a brownfield that's gone greenfield. And it's just over 0.5 megawatt. It's a pretty large install 3 years ago. And it's cranking out power every day to Progress Energy. And that was a nice start for us in the United States. So thank you to North Carolina and their great policies. This is another installation. It's not in North Carolina, but it's connected to North Carolina because the installer, FLS, is based in North Carolina. That is, we solar power Obama's helicopter now. No. He parks his helicopter that he rides around in for his joyrides underneath Suniva's solar panels. So we're at Quantico Air Base now. We're trying to get on Air Force One. And then one other. This is fresh from last Friday. That's the Raleigh Convention Center. Those are just about to go live in about a week. And it'll be about 1/3 of a megawatt up there. You can still see some loose wiring, so you know that's not live yet. But that's a nice install right downtown on the convention center there. It was supposed to be on there last spring when they hosted ACES in town under there. We're going to have solar-powered American Solar Energy Society meetings and convention and conference, but it's a little bit red tape getting all this done. So they finally pulled it off. PowerWorks is electrical contractor, and FLS is the solar integrator. So great partnership there, and it's nice to be powering the convention center now in Raleigh. So with the tip of the hat to North Carolina, I will now get on with other relevant items. We'll come back. Is it PDF? Yeah, sorry. All right. So I already pointed out that Suniva is based in Georgia. We spun out of Georgia Tech. And this is an interesting picture. This is Radiance installed the solar system, solar thermal, and solar PV on the Clough Center at Georgia Tech. Why is this relevant? Well, we are kind of on the campus of Georgia Tech right now, but also just across the street here is where Suniva was born, birthed out of the labs at the University Center of Excellence in PV. A little bit of a DOE-funded think tank there on how to create some of the most breakthrough technology in solar cells. And now, fast forward probably 5 years after Suniva was founded out of those labs, we've got Suniva panels powering the Clough Center. So a real cool story here. It's homegrown as well. This was the largest private installation in Georgia of our solar cells, and that is in Blairsville in the TVA territory, and that's about 1 megawatt. And what's interesting is that originally started with a pecan farmer down in South Georgia that wanted to irrigate his fields with solar power, and he got signed up, got on the Georgia Power Green Energy Program, started selling it back to Georgia Power, and thought, I can make more money selling solar than I can pecans. So Trey Pippin moved from just pecan farming to solar farming, and that's when he built this 1 megawatt in Blairsville that had nothing to do with pecans. It was all about selling solar to TVA. And this is a real pretty one downtown. This overlooks Centennial Park at Legacy Properties, so it's always a nice skyline picture. And that was done by Inman downtown here. And then the biggest one, I believe the biggest installation right now in Georgia, correct me if I'm wrong, does anybody know of a bigger one? There's a bunch that have been going live lately. We actually have more than 15 megawatts of solar in Georgia now. Most people don't even know that. If you look at all the maps, if you look probably at the updated North Carolina maps, they don't even show us with PIN. But so much of it's unreported. So we've done our own field study and culled all the data from GFA and other sources and put together about 15 megawatts of solar power in Georgia. So it's not as nascent an industry as people might tell you, and it's growing. This is the MARTA bus canopies that just went live last fall, and that's about 1.2 megawatts DC. And what's cool about that is that was a Department of Transportation grant that funded some of that. And one of the kickers was not just to make clean, green energy, but it was also to do more about energy efficiency. And what they did was prove that the shading on the buses allowed them to run their air conditioners less as they were doing their startup and some of their beginning day facilities there in the summertime. So they park the buses under the canopy when they crank them up in the mornings and in the afternoons whenever they pull out of there. They've got a lot less heat load on them. So that was part of the grant as well. So really innovative approach there. But enough of the eye candy. A little bit about the business. So who we are. We as Suniva design and manufacture solar cells, and we do that here in Georgia, and we sell that product around the world. We are venture capital funded, so our equity investors are some like Warburg Pincus, Goldman, HEA, NIG, and some others now. We've been in 3 rounds of financing, and it's all been up rounds as we've grown since 2007. And we're up to about 200 employees now, probably 205. A little bit on the growth of the business, and I think this underlines some of the how do you get a business up and going in the Southeast? Well, really anywhere. It's all about executing. You have to have a roadmap that you can prove to your investors you're achieving. And one of the nice things about the Suniva team, the management team, is it wasn't just technology. There's a great idea, but you also have to be able to run the business, build the organization, and fund it. And funding was key. So the business team has been very strong in that. And the goal was to achieve milestones in our technology and in our business growth at the same time. And as we march forward, we started in 2007. We built the production line in Norcross in record time, and we're making product at the end of 2008. The first line was sold out as soon as we started it up. That was nice. And all that product went to India. Pretty cool. We are exporting everything. So 99.5% of everything we made went to India. The other 0.5% went to a German company in Tucson, Arizona. Then we started up line 2 production. As soon as we put the order in, the board said, change it, double the size, and we doubled the size of line 2 and put it in, and 90% of that product was exported, mostly to Spain, Germany, and India again. So that was nice. Then we started deciding that the margins were getting compressed in the business, and it was tough to keep growing and making money. So we decided to move downstream a little bit and make the modules, not just the cells. At the beginning, we were only focused on cells. You'll notice we have 50 patents. It's on how to make a cell, not how to make a module. But by moving downstream, we were able to move into making our own modules, our own bill of material, and most of the cost in a module is the cell. Most of the cost in the cell is silicon. So we moved downstream and we started making our own modules. We've got them all certified through UL and IEC, and started moving that product. We originally contract manufactured those in India, and that was part of you wear a lot of hats when you're doing a startup. That was one of my roles, was to get the contract manufacturer up and running in India and turn a customer into a CM, and that's not always easy. We've now since rolled out, we've stopped CMing in India, and we're doing contract manufacturing in Taiwan and China. And we're also finishing product in the U.S. now, too. If you need to have product made all the way through the value stream in the U.S., we have Buy America product out of Norcross as well. So we've got this manufacturing flexibility that we've dialed in. And it's important not to have all that under our roof, under our lease. The idea that you can dial up and dial down a CM has really been helpful, because the industry is doing this. We'll be sold out one month, and it'll be famine the next month. And it's hard to run a factory 24/7 with shifts of people working 12-hour shifts 365 days a year. It's hard to keep them running efficiently when sales are doing that. And this business, when you're new to this business, is very spiky, because your channels to market have not been fully developed. That's another thing as a startup. The first thing you do is we have 2 of us in sales, and we're direct selling everything. You don't have any distribution to residential or smaller mom and pop shops, and so that gets really tough. So you see these spikes, and you might sell the big Asheville, North Carolina one, and then you wait for the next, and then it's like killing whales and putting them in the dinghy. So now we've gotten much more mature in that regard. We have channels to market through all of the larger solar distributors, solar integrators. We've gone from just those big projects globally now to a nice set of channels to market especially in North America. We're setting that up now in Europe. We found some good talent in Europe that used to work for Solyndra, so they're working for us now. So that's been good. And we continue to march forward on the accolades too, achieving world record sales, achieving modules that are setting efficiency standards at the market price. Our goal has always been, every time we come out with a new innovation and march up the efficiency power stream, is we can't sell it for more, and we can't add cost to our manufacturing at all to do that. So the R&D team, although they would love to come out with all these funky, cool designs, and they know how to do it, they're not allowed, because they have to come out with that design and decrease the cost at the same time. And that's been our guiding factor. There's no way anything we do can add cost. So we've had a good record here of executing along those lines. And then one of the things that's driving the business right now, it is a global supply chain. And if you look at decreasing costs, there was a great study put out yesterday on who's making any money in the value chain. And the value chain goes from polysilicon to wafers to cells to modules, and then to installation of the equipment, the gear. And the wafer prices, you can see, have come down drastically in such a way that really over the last 2 years, they're half of where they used to be, and plummeting much faster. Now, they have leveled off now, and people are asking questions, is anybody making money making wafers? The answer is, according to the article yesterday that looked at publicly reported data on these companies, no. The wafer guys are making zero. All right. What about the guys supplying the wafer guys up the value chain to the silicon? Well, the silicon is at $24 a kilogram. When we started the business, and one of my first tasks was to source silicon, I was paying $250 a kg for it to start the business. That was not going to have us making any money, but it was the only way to open the factory. But the spot price was probably all around $200, $250 in 2008. There was some gouging by the silicon producers, and they were getting fat and happy. Fast forward 2-3 years later now, a lot of people decided to add capacity, since you could get a lot of margin in that business. Now all this capacity has finally come on stream. It's in mostly in China, a little bit in Korea, a little bit in the U.S. Nothing new has come on stream in Europe. Ukraine has brought some on, and Russia's brought some on. The cash cost, these guys are not making their cash costs right now. They're not paying off debt, and some are talking about idling either old capacity or some of the new capacities mothballed from day one. So nobody's making money on the silicon side. So if silicon's losing money and the wafer guys are zero, what about the modules? The modules have come down in price drastically too, and this has been great. This is good for the end user. If you want solar on your house, you want solar on your business, this year you're going to pay half of what you would have paid 3 years ago for the base product, which is the module. This is the generating part. And what we were selling when we started our factory in 2008, I sold our cells for $1.75 a watt. That's what you sell a module for now. So the cell goes into the module. The cells are below $1 now a watt. So we're seeing drastic price reductions. Now, a lot of that is because the raw material has decreased, but the silicon, but other raw materials have gone up. Silver is the second most valuable raw material we're using to make these cells, and that's gone up quite a bit, even without the Hunt brothers involved. So the whole thing is seeing some really tight margins along the value chain. The paper yesterday also reported that the cell guys were making zero as well. So You lose money making silicon. You make zero making the wafer, zero making the cell. The module looks like there's a little bit of margin here, 5 or 10%. So really, the installed price, what's the end-use customer saying? Well, it's come way down as well, as you would imagine. Reports around $4 to $5 a watt installed. It's considerably less when people used to quote over $10 a watt. If you look on public websites, they're always about 6 months to a year behind on the real data. You look at the California data on their public website, and it's up around $8 a watt residential. It's not going in at that rate right now. Big commercial installations are quoting out just above $2 probably, $2 to $3. It's very good for the end user. It's tough to make a living in between, but that's the way these growing industries that have yet to mature and have a lot of players and a lot of global competition. That's the way it works. So I'll stop discussing the global marketplace and the business, and we'll leave it open for questions. And to the panel. Thank you. You're welcome.
You would, let's see, have a mic. Is there a wireless mic back there? I could get both of them.
Oops. Yep.
Here's another mic. Q&A period, and as I remind you, please speak clearly into the microphone if you have a question. Okay, who has questions? I bet you there are a few. Well, I'll start off with one that came from one of our webcast listeners. Given the presentations, which were great and hugely informative, do we all need to think about international markets right out of the box, or are there local and regional markets which are available?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. There's certainly, while we found that international markets may have been more mature, we're finding that U.S. markets are really coming on strong, and in fact, the Southeast too. We've got a lot of leaders right here in Atlanta, companies like Coca-Cola, Equifax, Interface, one of the most sustainable companies on the planet, based right here. And so, no, I think there's plenty of opportunity, here in the United States, here in the Southeast. I'd certainly say the markets may be more mature, but no, I don't think you have to start right out of the box internationally.
I think for us, this type of question, it's very general, and you have to look at the product you're making and what's the competition, how fragmented is the market around the globe, and what's driving supply and demand. For solar PV, it was globally competitive from day one. Lots of European players when we entered the market. Now, many of those have gone away. The European incentives were so inflated that a lot of people were fat and happy in Germany and Italy, and they're dying off. So, energy is one of the most political businesses out there to be in. So there's going to be regional markets. Certainly, North Carolina with RPS has created a great market at the local level. Don't see a lot of solar companies in North Carolina exporting from North Carolina. There are some. There's not that many in Georgia. There's us and a few others. So you look at the global supply chain, you look at the regional dynamics, and it just depends on the business. For us, it had to be global from day one. Now, the good thing about last year was the first year that we ever sold more product domestically than internationally. So it kept us out of the airports a little bit more, maybe. That's another good reason to locate in Atlanta and in Georgia. Hartsfield has a flight everywhere in the world all the time without many connections, and that's a good way to run a business. We ship ourselves by air freight, because they have such a huge value density. If you look at the cost per pound, if you will, they stack up the cube extremely well. The modules are ocean freighted for the most part, so the Port of Savannah has been pivotal, and a lot of our raw material comes in through the Port of Savannah. So being close to local logistics has been important. It is because we're shipping widgets and we're bringing in raw material and chemicals. It is very much a logistics supply chain that we have to look at as well, and Georgia's been good in that regard.
I have two questions. One, and this comes from a customer's perspective, which is important when you're talking about doing a business. And we're wanting to do a commercial installation of photovoltaic, relatively small, I guess a 1/4 megawatt. But one of the things that I have run up against constantly are practitioners that in the industry that really don't, designers that don't embrace it or are not able to put the whole design together in a way that's going to be profitable or with a reasonable payback. So the first question is, what is the best way of evaluating, knowing that some of these incentives will go away? And most recently, I looked at Georgia Power, and they're going from 17 cents, now they're talking about going to 15 cents after you're through the 2-year waiting list for the power purchase agreement. So all these things impact a customer's decision of, am I going to be able to put this on my building and pay the return to equity and return the cost of capital? That's the first question, and then I'll want a follow-up question. So in terms of evaluating, what's the best?
Yeah, I'll switch hats. I'll put on my Georgia Solar Energy Association hat and say, you know, that there are extremely reputable installers that have been running their business for quite a while. Several are in the room right now, and they have credentials, and they know how to look at that business, and they know how it fits with the state incentives and the federal incentives. And if they can't give you a clear answer, there should be no wishy-washy. Now, there are policy items that may change in the future that nobody can help. The smart guys are aware of those too. They have to be able to talk clearly about those. The folks on the Georgia Solar Energy Association, for the most part, are, and certainly our board members that are installers that have been working with us, they're up to date on all that. If they can't run your financial model for you almost from the first conversation, you need to move on to a different installer. The other thing is, you know, they've got to have the street cred. You've got to check the references. There are a lot of people that are getting into solar that are just getting into it. And the installation is something that it's an electrical device that has to be designed properly. And there are general contractors rushing around trying to do solar all of a sudden because it's the hot new growth area. You got to be careful. You got to be careful. Check the references, see if they're certified. You know, you have to have a professional electrician, a licensed electrician has to pull the permits. All that has to be done on the legit side. There's NABCEP certifications that are important. So, you know, you got to check them out. And there are a lot of people rushing into it, and with good intentions. But policy got set in Australia. I was in Australia earlier last year, and the market went crazy because they had a feed-in tariff that just exactly equaled the cost they would give you back immediately in year one based on, actually it was renewable energy credits, equal to the cost of a 2 kilowatt residential install. So if you put it in, sign the paperwork over to the installer, he would turn in the credits, he'd get paid right away, and it was a complete cash wash. It was zeroed out from day one. It's a nice program. But what it created was there was no training and there was no certification. So everybody thought they could install solar very quickly, and everybody tried. And the 2 kilowatt magic number was a DC nameplate number stamped on the label of the module, not on what the performance of the project was actually going to give you. So all of a sudden, quality didn't matter either. Where the modules came from and what they really performed like didn't matter at all. So it created a real sham of a system. They now have backed out of it, but they did have 3 people die on the roof. And that's not a big country, people-wise. 3 dead solar installers. So, yeah, you need to make sure that the reputable person's doing it.
And one additional thought, in addition to the installer, bringing your CPA or accountant in early, the tax credits are a very important aspect. Your CPA or accountant, if they have not been down this path before, you may not want to be the first one to test the waters with. So having them even interface with the installer, reputable installer, is a good way to help them make sure that everything's being filed for tax purposes correctly at the end of the day.
The follow-up question I have is, which may dovetail off Australia. You, I think, on your slide, Anthony showed a 19% efficiency now on your cells and 16% on the modules. How does that stack up with competition globally?
Yeah, it's a good question. You'll see press reports out every few weeks or so announcing a new world record cell, a new thin film at like 20%, which is amazing. And then there's existing technology out there that's making strides too. And all of those you have to kind of peel back the layers of the onion and say, what are they really offering here? The theoretical limit of silicon, as made and shown here, multi or mono or whatever, as long as it's silicon, not a thin film, it's 27, 28%. It's just based on physics. And once you create a working diode out of it, the best you could probably do is about 25%. So you go from the theoretical to the practical. The highest performing single junction silicon cell out there right now is about 24%. SunPower and Sanyo have had the technology. SunPower does it in an ingenious way. It's a very expensive way to make a cell, but it's brilliant. And it costs more to do that. There's copper plating, there's all kinds of back contacts. So we know how to make that cell. We choose not to because it costs about 50% more in processing to do that. We're trying to make a market clearing cell and product. And then Sanyo just layers up several different types of technology to do theirs. And it's really cool, but it's very expensive. So we're trying not to make the very cool, expensive product. The product roadmap gets us to, this week we started making about 19.2%, probably on our max, our bell curve, 19% cell efficiency is where we're hitting everyday production now, as we've just put in some new innovations. There are companies that have announced Pluto and some other technologies out of China and from Australia, University of New South Wales. It's not really commercially viable, and I would say I would challenge any independent auditor to go into the factory and see if that's what's flashing today. You can come in our factory. I'll show you the records right now. I get a daily report. It shows you exactly what we're flashing. So it's not smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of people that hype the product. So I would say 19% is on a daily production is pretty high without having to add all the extra junctions and layers and back contacts and everything that add cost. Everybody else in the bulk is going to be down around, if we're making a 19%, they're going to be down around 17.5%. And then thin films, 10 to 12%.
Yeah, questions on intellectual property. Obviously, Anthony mentions how important IP is for the solar world, but DualX, I'm interested, last week or so I've seen in the ABC where after being in business for years, you've just launched your first patent for IP. So what's...
Just approved.
Just got approved?
Yeah.
What took so long on that, and what exactly is that patent? What is it? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that one was on our mobile application, whereby we utilize the GPS in your smartphone in order to power on and off connected devices. So, for example, got my iPhone, and when I left the office, I didn't bother to power down my laptop, my monitor, my voice over IP phone. It recognized when I got to 500 yards where I've got it set that it just automatically powers that down for me. And then when I get 500 yards to the office, it'll start powering things up. But yeah, we've got several others as well. The approval process and patents just takes longer. for what we're finding. But yeah, I mean, it's can be a painful process, but we've had some really good help here locally in helping establish that.
Yeah, I'm David Bragan. I have a question for Anthony. You described the picture of the supply chain where just about nobody makes money, or those who do make less and less. Where is this going? What's the conclusion? What do you see happening as a result of that?
I think there's probably the best way to describe it is it's a young industry with a lot of fragmentation. And if you look at any history of any industries or markets that have been created, when they're young, they bifurcate. So there's a lot of low quality, low price on one side, mom and pops, everybody trying it out. And there's the brilliant ideas that are costly on the other side. And what you also see, are people that converge in the middle, or that one of these goes out of business. We're starting to see a lot of solar companies go out of business. I think 2011 was probably the height of solar businesses collapsing. A couple of our big customers collapsed. Solon, I guess, was probably the most significant one. Our second company we ever had a global contract with to sell them ourselves. They're now not making modules anymore in Tucson, Arizona, or Berlin, or Austria. So it will fragment. I mean, it is fragmented. It will consolidate now. I think that's another stage of the industry maturity that's about to happen. I think you'll see, the sides converge into more of a typical bell curve with a product in the middle. And then you'll see chunks that do value engineering off of that to try and differentiate the product. There's also a heavy commoditization happening. The global nature of the business has forced everybody to make a commodity of one thing the same way, so that they can easily substitute into any specification. So I think for a while you'll see this drive to the middle on this commodity, and then you'll start seeing some innovations kick off, and some people being able to add value up or downstream on it. At least that's what I hope happens.
Paul, this is a question to you. Given your presentation regarding kind of the highly consolidated nature of the utilities industry in the Southeast, with the Duke Progress merger, do you see that changing in any way? Better, good, bad, or ugly?
In the short term, it probably won't change much of anything. Duke and Progress have been trying to merge for over a year now. They're still waiting regulatory approval from FERC and anticipate that being concluded one way or another by the middle of this year. And when you go down into some of the details, what is happening is that the two holding companies are merging, and then the two operating companies that serve customers in North Carolina and South Carolina are remaining independent. So in the short term, from a customer perspective, from an installer trying to interconnect to these utilities, probably nothing is going to come out. If those the two holding companies, if they eventually merge at some point, that's where you may see some sort of differences. Duke has had a own and operate type of business approach towards the renewable energy and energy efficiency portfolio standard. Progress, on the other hand, has had a more assigned PPA or power purchase agreements with developers throughout the state. If those two holding companies do merge, it's not clear which one of those business strategies would become more dominant in the new company. So in the short term, probably nothing, but over the long term, very murky of where that would go.
So this is from another webcast participant, but it's a kind of an analogous question or a parallel question. So from a value proposition perspective, where do you see the most profitability in the value chain in an integrated utility? Is it power generation? Is it transmission? Is it distribution? Other?
For an investor in utility? Mm-hmm. I am probably not the best person to answer that. They have large teams of people that determine that and do those analyses. What we have seen in North Carolina, though, is there's certainly an interest towards baseload generation. The way many of the regulatory environments are set up, the utilities have a lot of opportunity to make a return on investment if they build larger generation units. That is just a way they are responding to the regulatory environment that is in front of them, and that's a natural reaction for a business. So that hasn't been a trend. Policy discussions do look at that, find ways to maybe. One of the biggest challenges for policy at this point is if you are going to add renewables, third-party generators, if you're going to implement energy efficiency, at the end of the day, electric utilities, when you flick the light switch on, 99.9% of the time, the lights come on, and they manage a giant infrastructure that's very capital intensive to make that happen. So any sort of new technologies or policies or changes in the policy environment have to take into account that these are businesses, and at the end of the day, they need a sustainable business model as well. So policy has to be crafted with an eye towards that to make sure when you turn on the light switch, you still have power when you want it.
Yeah, so is it Paul with Sunniva? Anthony, excuse me. I had two quick questions. I saw on your slides you quickly passed through something that mentioned thin film. I was wondering where you see that direction going. And two, if it's possible, get a little more detail on the 1 megawatt Blairsville project without getting anything proprietary. I'd be interested in that.
Yeah. So thin film, if we talk about commercial solar PV technologies, there's crystalline, which is made with silicon, multi and mono. We do mono. And then there's thin film, which is CAD-TEL, amorphous silicon, and SIGs. Probably the biggest solar manufacturer in the United States, maybe the world, First Solar, is making thin film. And they've done a lot of big solar farms with that. Solyndra was a thin film type product on a tube. Brilliant technology, but you look at First Solar was driving, we're the lowest cost to buy and $1 per watt. Solyndra was saying, we got to get the cost down, but we have a brilliant approach to unballasted rooftop systems. So thin film can be used in a number of different ways. Thin film struggles a little bit with the return on value now because crystalline has come down so low in price. I was asked this morning by some students here, I was doing a guest lecture, and they said, you know, what happened? Was it the competition, or was it that they couldn't get their costs down? And, you know, if you can't get your costs down, the competition will kill you. So it's a little bit of that. But the whole idea that, you know, they were putting together a business model that never showed our price in silicon coming down, you know, to be 30% of what it was 3 or 4 years ago. You just can't model that. We wouldn't have modeled that. So all of a sudden, their cool technology that would have been price competitive, had things kind of drifted along normally, all of a sudden they can't make a go of it. So thin film, First Solar's now reporting problems. They've missed their quarterly. I think they've just asked for an extension on their 10K filing. Look for the world's largest thin film company to have a blip here. Why? Because we're seeing that all of a sudden there was no more way to take cost out of thin film. If anything, it was going to go up a little bit in price unless they just got massive scale, and they'd already done that. So with silicon continuing to come down and reach, you know, a real practical cost and how to manufacture it, it's starting to nip away all of the thin film value equation. And if you can get 19% on crystalline and you're only getting 10 or 12% efficiency on thin film, you got to put that much more racking, mounting, hardware, wiring, installation, labor into a thin film install, and now the price delta at the beginning for their product's not there, and then you outproduce them over the lifetime of the warranty. They don't warranty their product for as long as we do ours either, so you can't build the lifetime financials out as well with thin film. So, you know, I think some of the market dynamics are starting to devalue that. And you had a second question? Oh. Probably not. I think the solar integrator was ESA. They're a Spanish company. They have a Florida office. It was partially funded by REAP grants, which is a renewable rural energy agricultural program by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So if you're in a rural area, you can apply for this. You can go in 250 kilowatt blocks. So if you saw that picture, there was a megawatt divided into 4, and they were 4 projects all co-located so that they could go in for 4 REAP grants. So there's way that program is attacked. That's about all I think is publicly available on that.
Well, I think we need, it's 2:05, and usually we end this around 2. So I think if you have other questions, please come up and see the speakers afterwards. I think they'll be here for a few more minutes and are open to more questions. 2 things. First, remember the next program is Wednesday, April 18th. And second, let's please thank our speakers for the outstanding presentations at Chapel Bank.